They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole.
Get
we found.
ready. It's time again to venture down the rabbit hole into the world of cybersecurity. You're plugged into the podcast for security leaders and practitioners with a business sense. Prepare for unique interviews, insights, and practical advice that makes your job just a bit easier. And now, please welcome your guides on this adventure, James Jardine and the White Rabbit, Rafal Loose.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome down to Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Raf here, and I've got two good guests, and we're going to be talking about, of course, get right down to business on vulnerability management. It's a topic that I've bantered about quite a bit lately. It is still, as far as I'm concerned, no less broken than it was 20 years ago, except now it's broken at a much bigger scale. And we've added about 20 years of technical debt to the situation, which makes everything awesome. So to give some perspective on this, and you guys all love my perspective because I can get ranty, but why not bring people that actually do this for a living? So I've got Britney and Ace with me. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Britney, ladies first.
Hi, I'm Britney Hommertzheim. It's good to see you again, Raf.
Good.
So last time we talked, I was with AMC. I've since kind of moved on to Cardinal Health. And I've got Ace with me, who is an awesome lead all around vulnerability management.
Yeah. How you doing? Been at Cardinal for, I'm Ace Moore, obviously. Been at Cardinal for about 3 or 4 months now, I guess. Prior to this, I was in the financial industry. So I was at State Farm. Coming over to the health side, it's definitely a change of pace.
Welcome to a slightly different world. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Healthcare. I've got lots of friends that are in healthcare, and if you that their joke is, if you think finances are broken, just wait until you see healthcare.
Right.
What's really interesting though, guys, because we got in this conversation, Brittany, you and I got in this conversation because we started talking about how, I think I put a quote out and kind of a something around spreadsheets and being impossible to track things. And what's really fascinating to me, guys, and I'll put this out there and you guys can take it from here, but it is fascinating to me how many orgs, large IT orgs, that seem to have their act together are still using spreadsheets to manage vulnerabilities and hold people accountable and do lifecycle management. Not. I'll start there and let you guys go. Like, what do you think of that?
It's not the most not the best way to keep stuff, I would say. People, I think there's this big caveat in like our industry where like Excel is the go-to harbor of like data and everything, and
Right.
we encrypt it, but oh wow, great, you can unencrypt it pretty easily too with a couple tools. But I don't know, I think we just need to start having a more secure place for this type of stuff, because if somebody gets into like our network, 9 times out of 10 they're looking for stuff like that. So
Yeah. I find that, well, one, security tools are just ridiculous expensive, like real stupid. And so you have to convince your company to invest in these tools, right? These are things we need. Generally, vulnerabilities is really pushed for some compliance reason that they need to have on the books, right? And so you get your funding and they're like, here's your fantastic tool. And then it spits out a bunch of work and you have to coordinate with a bunch of teams. And then going back to the business to say, hey, we need something better than Excel. It's really hard to get that additional funding to like bring it into something and actually have something that manages things, whether it's like integrating into a ticket system or whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah.
Like the reinvestment into it is hard.
Well, let me ask this to kind of kick that. Speaking of things being difficult, let me kick this in a different gear. Every organization I've talked to, probably in the last 10 years, that has a fledgling or trying to level up the game on vulnerability management has two major problems. One, vulnerability management actually just to them means patch management, which is the first thing. We'll talk about that in a second. The second thing is they like the first couple times they actually run a scan to identify the things that are wrong. I feel like the image I have in my head, and if you just kind of close your eyes and you imagine this, remember we all used to watch Looney Tunes, and Wile E. Coyote would do something unbelievably stupid, and he'd fire the rocket or whatever, and it would knock off the whole cliff except for the part over his head, and as it falls on him, he'd just go pull out this tiny umbrella and hold the sign that says "Yikes!" Right? That is what I imagine happens in those discussions, because you get into you run the scan against your 7 million IP addresses. I'm joking, it's only like 6. It comes back with tens of thousands of things that the scanner says are critical, and you go, great, all right then, now what? So let's start there.
On a Friday.
What's that?
Don't let it be ran on a Friday.
Yeah, no, but it's always run over. It's always run over the weekend, right? And it comes back, starts on Monday, walk into Monday, and you have this mountain of. How do you guys even begin to prioritize? Because there's hundreds of different ways, but ultimately they come back to some method of these things are more important than these things because some vendor says so. How do you interject or add your logic to it? Because you're not the same as every other company.
Right. I'll say for me personally, my background is kind of split between VM and as well as threat intelligence.
Okay.
So I'll always take what's what I consider like what's hot in the streets right now.
Okay.
So I see what's being exploited heavily, especially like in our industry or in our sector, or in general, like in other companies, or just what's being involved with some of these big malicious attacks that are going on, and then I try to look at what we have in our environment, and then I take those two things and evaluate, and I prioritize that way. I feel like that's the best way to do it. But also you want to take into account the kind of the assets that you have. Most times, generally, what could be potentially exploited and cause like your business to not run. So I feel like that's always important to look at. So that's generally like my headspace when I'm evaluating and prioritizing vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, and so take what Ace said, and start thinking about, what are your critical assets, what's going on right now in the threat landscape, and then add that to your Excel sheet, right? you know, it's a hard, right? Yay! It's a hard thing to do and to be asked to do when you're not going back into investing in some of this stuff. But I mean, ultimately, that's what you have to get after. Otherwise, you are taking the vendor's word for it and going after things that probably aren't your true priority.
Well,
those darn vendors.
Yeah, well, those darn vendors. I've had a conversation recently which made me sort of rethink prioritization and how I think about it. And here's why. Had a friend of mine that used to run a vulnerability management program. He was a CISO of this company, and he's like, listen, my biggest problem, like vulnerability management and automated prioritization and dashboarding, like that's all cute. He's like, but I've got 10 years of stuff that's been out there that I am now accountable for making that stuff not suck as much as it did when I joined here. And he's like, all the fancy tools aren't helping me with how do I pare this list down to something meaningful? Because you've got an asset owner, right? You've got whatever CTO at that level, or line of business owner or whatever. And they've got a cluster of assets, IP addresses, or machine names they need to go fix, and they've got 150 criticals, and they look at that and go, deer headlights, now what? And then you start getting, well, maybe we can't fix this, there's too much work here. How do you get that to something meaningful? Because there's got to be, like, all the math in the world isn't going to solve that for you, but how do you figure out, like, what's the process? Is it can you engage with those people? Can you sit them down and go, look, there are 3,000 things that could cause this company harm right now, you own them all right, like, how do we fix that without them going, like, literally doing the thing that kids do when they get frustrated, flip the table over and dump the checkers on the floor and walk away?
For sure. I think for one, I think it starts, especially this is more of a people problem more than anything. I think, and I think it kind of starts before the vulnerabilities and everything. I think that you kind of got to build that rapport with control or not control owners, but product owners like throughout the year. Talk to them, hop into their meetings and stuff like that. Get to know them. In that way, they'll be more favorable to, fix the shit that they have. Can I curse on here?
Too late. Done.
Sure. Screw it.
Yeah. So, so I mean, yeah. That and that's I think that's what it is about. Is just building that rapport with people who have things that make your job a lot harder. And once you kind of build that relationship, when you need to have those tough conversations with them, like, hey, you have all the stuff that's been unpatched since 1983. Like, can you please fix this? Like, I think that's usually the route that I try to take. Like, I'm fairly new to the company now, but in general, I'm just trying to build out those relationships because I know I'm going to have to collaborate and work with people who aren't on my team or not even in our stock eventually. So talking to those product owners, getting to know them, and just remembering like fun facts about them that they have in these meticulous conversations, that kind of helps out with the favors that you're asking them, like in the future.
Social engineering your way into the hearts and minds. I
Smart
love
man.
it.
That's how you do it, man.
Yeah, I mean, to Ace's point, partnership is absolutely key. If you're lucky enough to have someone with a bit of knowledge on their end, so for example, if you have someone that's has a background in networking or used to be a sysadmin, you can find a lot of vulnerabilities that are just in the base image, right? Like configuration wise, those types of things. And if you're able to get that partnership between your old sysadmin and your current sysadmins, and just saying, hey, you know what we'll do? We'll sit down, we'll scrub the space image, we'll come up with some things, and we'll help you build it. I think just providing them that additional assistance is always an awesome thing to do. But with that being said, this kind of goes back to the whole social engineering thing because they don't want you coming in and taking over either. So you have to kind of create that partnership, and hopefully like build a little trust there that you're able to assist versus telling them that they have to do something.
Well, and I just heard you say you're going to get involved, right? So that doesn't that necessarily necessitate? Doesn't that require? Wow, I'm articulate today. Doesn't that require you to have like potentially a massive SecOps team? Because there aren't like two system owners in the company, right? If you're going to offer to get involved and help them, that could potentially get into scale issues as well.
Yeah.
But I don't. You're right. I don't know if there's a better way necessarily.
Yeah, and time issues too, right?
Or that.
I mean, you've only got so many resources, and a lot of times, I mean, most companies don't have the bench for all their security people to go out and create these partnerships. So it kind of goes back to this priority thing, and that darn spreadsheet that you're using with all of your calculations.
Yeah, it's very interesting to game some of this and what sort of human psychology you have to use to get into people's heads to get them to start thinking about how they want to address, do they want to address, when do they want to address? Because I think we've all seen this, right? You dump a spreadsheet or an output of some vuln scan onto somebody's desk. They look at it and go, yeah, right. I've got 7,000 other things to do. And it just gets forgotten. Right. And and you, all the prodding them in the world isn't going to help when they don't have the ability to go make that change. So it's hard. This is a tough topic.
Yeah. And I mean, we haven't even started talking about life cycle replacement.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute.
Systems.
We're going to get that in a minute. Yeah. Ace is already like I'm out. I'm pulling the parachute cord out. You guys, I mentioned this earlier. The other major problem that I'm seeing is vulnerability management essentially has been stripped down just strictly to patch management, and it's not, because patches aren't your only source of vulnerability.
No.
So now what?
So this is very interesting, and I think it brings into a larger topic of just risk management, right? when we talk exploitation, when we talk about just access into the network, a lot of these new attacks that we're seeing and just replaying them.
Yeah.
It may not necessarily, it's just picking all these little parts together, and finding, okay, well, we left something open, or we were practicing on a device and it's exposed. We didn't do our cleanup. All of these little things that are, not necessarily vulnerabilities. It's the oops that hang out
It's
there.
always the oops that gets you. And to kind of highlight the point of vulnerability management isn't just patch management. With more companies doing more things in public cloud, a simple configuration gotcha where you leave an account with a simple password or an SSH shell open to the world, and you set a guessable password or something, and suddenly your entire environment is up for grabs, and that's the gateway to your everything.
Yep.
But it doesn't appear in your vulnerability management dashboard because what patch goes for that? It doesn't, right? So I think that's one of the second big frustrating thing for me is when I look at vulnerability management, and I'm talking about the output of a pen test. If you've got a bug bounty program, if you've got actual patch management, you've got AppSec happening, you've got cloud posture and configuration, kind of lookups and testing and all that. Like bringing all that together into a technical risk management function that encompasses all the things that make your organization vulnerable to attack. Yeah. And we haven't even gone into attack surface detection, right? Yeah. Knowing like what the hell you have out there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think like when you look at it that way from like a really everything kind of point of view, it kind of makes us look like we're the bad news crew at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like where we're talking it, we're telling people, hey, this is misconfigured. Hey, this is the CVE is attached to this server, and I know it's a high usage server, but you need to take it down or take it offline so we can fix this. Like, it just makes it kind of makes us, like I said, the bad news crew. And that's kind of a reputation that vulnerability management is starting to kind of like have, and I think like in the stock and just from organization level across the board.
Brittany, you're shaking your head.
I was just kind of going back to what you said, and I said a little bit more. It's a subset of risk management. And so like in my head, I'm trying to think where vulnerability and risk management like cross over. When do they bleed over? When is it no longer vulnerability management and it's risk management, or is it always just risk management?
Oh, okay. That's a philosophical question that I don't really
have a be or not to be.
I just threw it out there.
Yeah, well done. Curveball. Surprise. So that's interesting because technical risk management or enterprise risk management looks at, if you pull the lens back completely, it looks at all the kinds of risk an organization faces: operational, financial, legal, political, whatever, right? There's a million different types of and avenues for risk. The last good presentation on it was a gentleman named James Christiansen I used to work with, and identifying basically 7 essential types of Harvard Business School types of risk, right? You know what's funny? Security was not on any of those lists. And people get upset about that I've had conversations with, and I used to as well until I thought about this, and James explained it to me pretty easily. He's like, look, security isn't its own category. It impacts all the others, right? Because something getting hacked impacts your ability to operate, your finances, your legal responsibilities, and all the other things. And you're like, oh, yeah. So where does cyber risk management overlap with vulnerability management? I'm sure there's a pretty fine line there. Do you guys, do you guys do you have separate in your experience? Have you had separate organizations for those things?
No.
Okay.
I think in places that I've worked in the past, everything has just fell under risk,
Okay.
just the umbrella of risk, and we never really diversified what or define different types of risk, and I think that's something that organizations kind of need to improve on as we progress, and attacks have become a lot more sophisticated as well too.
So I've seen it in a couple different ways. I've seen it fall under IT risk. I've seen it fall under more like general counsel and compliance,
Okay.
because usually
That's
compliance
where I
falls
see
under
it.
with third party risk, right?
Yeah.
And somehow like we have to work together to figure out how these risks impact one another. So I've seen it come together in a multiple different ways, but I mean, to your point, Raf, like it does impact so many factors of the business. But a lot of times, who's ever managing those separate like risk verticals, are they looking at all the components that comprise risk, and are they considering security as part of their risk, right? Because in those cases, they're looking at it independently until you're sitting all in a room with a bunch of auditors and underwriters from your insurance company and talking about, oh, here's our risk.
Yeah. So as you're talking, it got a little bit more clear for me in my head. Vulnerability management is still a technical function. Vulnerability management plus compliance is a risk function, right? Because if vulnerabilities are a technical thing, it's ways you're open to attack, right? So it's the how are you open to attack, and risk management ultimately includes things that are non-technical and encompasses compliance. So I think non-technology plus compliance plus vulman equals risk management. That's my back of the napkin response on that.
Okay, we'll go with it.
That's a dangerous response.
No, I have to think about all the things.
There was a lot of jargon there.
Well, I mean, yes, also, but think about it this way: the average organization that does not have more than 10 people in IT, much less security, right? And I'm, my day job, I'm talking to companies that have less than 5 security people, sometimes less than one. And they're going, yeah, we do all that. And I'm like, no, that's not that is actually not possible. And they say, well, yeah, we have a vulnerability management program. And I always want to break into I want to break into a Princess Bride quote. You keep saying that word. I do not think it means what you think it means, right? Because you keep saying vulnerability management, and then you talk about the fact that you've patch scanned. I'm like, those are not the same.
Yeah. And I mean, so to like those companies' interests, like they aren't necessarily ingrained into it either, right? Like they don't have the resource space to really get into it. So it's, hey, I mean, usually you're just hiring guns for hire, to come and tell me what I need to know. And then how much I can or cannot respond to it, is to be determined, right? I mean, you throw it out there and then maybe somebody gets on a couple things and you do your scan a quarter later.
Yeah. See, this is where I think the first major pitfall becomes on the way to, like, once organizations have that awakening, like, we need to do this, we get into, well, we don't have the means to do it. Let's go hire a consultant, or let's buy a tool, and the tool will tell us. And the danger there is you don't, if you just plug a bunch of IP addresses, get the output, and the tool says these first, these next, then I think the danger is they know nothing about the way your organization functions. So critical may actually not be at all, and low may actually be the system that's connected to your payroll server or your payroll processing, right? Or your order processing. Like 3 things that are moderate in a row connected to a system that does the most important thing in your company is more important than a critical that touches just a bunch of marketing literature on a web platform somewhere. And
so let me.
that's the
Sorry, go
difficult
ahead,
part.
Raf. So I'm going to come at this from a legal standpoint and a liability standpoint. If I'm in a small business, right? Back to the cost of tools, security is not targeted to the small business world. Like they don't have a lot of options that are out there that are at a great price. But if they do decide to invest in there, they scan and they come back with all these criticals. Me being the small shop that I am, I'm not going to be able to address a lot of these vulnerabilities, but I am going to have the knowledge of these vulnerabilities.
Right.
And then I get popped.
Yeah.
How liable am I in that situation?
All of it.
Right. And so like versus like going the guns for hire route, get some consulting company to then tell me like, here's the couple of things we want you to fix. Now I can hold another business liable, right? We go through these contractual indemnification clauses and these sort of things.
Yeah.
So we can throw it on the back of someone else's shoulders. So you have to have this balancing act of like, how much information can we have? Because if I am being provided all this information and I'm not responding to it, am I doing my due diligence? Am I going to be found negligent? And I think negligence is fine, but the gross negligence is where we get into problems, right?
Yeah.
So it's this weird balancing act of like, how much information should I be getting from like a legal standpoint? Like when is that too much information that I'm now liable?
Well, Ace, you look like you had something to say. I'm going to jump in after you.
No, so I'm just thinking about, it's tough for like small businesses and small shops.
Oh, it's
And
freaking impossible.
yeah, and I'm like, that just it becomes just a playground for threat actors at the end of the day. And I'm just like, what are some solutions to like, make this stuff easier, and obviously, and also keep meeting the profitable needs of these, companies that are providing these tools to fix these vulnerabilities that these small shops may have. Like what is the solution that there's out there right now for them? I don't think there's any.
No, and Brittany, to your point, and I want to give you a direct answer because I've heard this asked before. And I have a friend of mine who's an attorney that does breach litigation and such. And his direct quote, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit 'cause it's been a while, but he's like, yeah, we were talking about, the concept of log everything, right? We should just log everything.
Mm.
Every device should be logging all the time. He's like, that is a great way to collect evidence against yourself in the class action lawsuit. And now to extend his quote, if all you're doing is scanning and dumping to a spreadsheet someplace and not actually making progress in a meaningful way, and I want to stress meaningful way, right? Measuring some sort of KPIs against some sort of SLA, against some repeatable industry standard scoring, weighing, prioritization thing, then literally someone's going to go, hey, you knew about this thing 3 years ago. You didn't patch it. Guess what? That's called gross negligence. You're like, well, but we had too much work. That's not an excuse. It's just not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, these are conversations that we have with our legal teams, and just kind of talking through this about how much information is too much information. And fortunately, unfortunately, when you bring in a third party, you can negotiate some of that liability too. You can also negotiate just attorney-client privilege, and so some of that information is no longer discoverable, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not on your network, it's not there.
Maybe.
you have to play this whole game of like, how can I be provided enough information but not too much information?
Gray area.
Yeah, because I don't want to cause harm to my business,
Yeah.
but I do want to provide a sense of security and function back to the organization. I do want to protect them, but what's the most meaningful way to do that I don't put my company at risk?
That is probably the $1 billion question right there, Brittany. How do I, when you're doing nothing right? It's almost easier to say, I knew nothing, I didn't see it, I can't, yes, you can be held liable for being an idiot and not knowing anything, but but apparently not. Anyway, but if you do have the data and you haven't acted on it, I imagine that's worse. So that balance between, I can imagine everybody that's listening to this is staring at their vulnerability management platform or their spreadsheets and going, "Oh crap!" But I'm going to channel Sean, our proverbial legal eagle on this podcast, and say, you know, you've got to be defensible in the court of law. How do you make yourself? How do you give yourself a good defense and say, I've done necessary and proper? It doesn't have to be JPMC 200, $500 million a year on security good, but it should be proportional to the type of business you are, to the way you do business. If you're doing $100 million in business in e-commerce quarter, and you spend, you've hired a security person part-time and they do nothing, like, is that defensible to court of law? I don't think so. I would guess not. I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but I look at that. A reasonable person can look at that and go, yeah, that's probably not enough. Right. So vulnerability management is a tough space, because it isn't just about remediation. We'll close off with this, because you mentioned this in the beginning, Brittany, life cycle, right? So vulnerability management implies there's more to it than just fixing, like managing vulnerabilities, because you guys know, I've been a part of this way back in the day, where some of the things that you cannot patch because the thing breaks as a result are security things. Right? We all make the same face. I can tell you there's plenty of products out there, McAfee, ISS, back in the day, Symantec, God help us, some others, that, like, you were on an ancient version of the Java runtime, right? But you could not update because your security platform would break. And you have to explain that to your CISO or CIO. And you're like, yeah, our security stuff breaks if we are doing good security. I don't know. What world do we live in? But there are plenty of times where the legitimate answer is, I cannot patch medical devices. I cannot patch this in your 3-day critical patch cycle, because I have to go get it recertified by 75 different people. I have to go pass rigorous testing or whatever, or simply whatever other insert excuse. But there's more to it. It has to be documented. It has to be an audit trail. It has to be, like, all that. And spreadsheets don't do that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna swing through and kind of circle it all back to when we talked about prioritization. So when we talk about liability, like, how much do we need to get done to show that we're doing something, when we're considering, like, all of these dependencies that go on various software, out-of-date systems? I think we have to come up with some way to prioritize these, because if nothing else, excuse me, you can show that you have looked into what you have found, and you're able to identify what's important to your environment, and you have taken action. And whether that is, hey, we've done our assessment and we're accepting risk, we are going to put these things behind another firewall and mitigate it, or we're going to work with somebody else and remediate it. You have to have, I think just by doing that, by prioritizing and determining what you're going to do with the risk, gets you into, like, a safe space as far as liability is concerned.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting discussion. I don't see enough lifecycle management, guys. I just don't. I don't see enough people thinking about it. They look at the vuln, or they look at the patch missing. They make a decision. Can we not? If they say no, it just gets documented, hopefully someplace, and forgotten about, and it's gone.
Yeah, it sits there.
I think that's partially due. We're 9 times out of 10, we're running around with our heads on fire all the time.
True.
So it's like It's like, stuff that, requires a lot of bandwidth. Where do we find the time to do that? I think that's all about prioritizing and putting stuff that's on your backlog, um, up to the front because, at the end of the day, it's about protecting. That's what
Mhm.
security means, protection. So,
Yeah.
And like Ace had brought up earlier, partnerships. If we know who is running these outdated systems, and it's probably a critical function to the business, right? That's why we haven't upgraded, because if we upgrade, it's going to break whatever process or whatever software that we're using. And so, if we're able to partnership with that part of the business and determine, hey, what do you want to get? Like, what's your strategy? What's your roadmap? Where are you going? If we upgrade, we can get you A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
We can make this a larger project, and we're just sliding that security in the background, right?
Yeah.
But we're providing a service back to the business. But on the back end, we're kind of getting what we want too. But in order to do that, you have to have a safe space that you've created this partnership with the business, that they know that you're there to help. And you're not hey, we're going to break your system because we need to update it.
Yeah.
yeah.
I I think that security has gotten out of the business of patching things, systems directly, hands on, mainly because we've broken so many things where the cure was worse than the disease. Uh, and we've had our hands slapped. So we're like, fine, I don't want to do it anymore. Fight me. Um, but then you end up with the opposite where, and as security trends more into a governance function and less of an operations function in most companies, or at least the two get heavily segregated, right? Because they're totally different parts of the risk discussion. Um, Designing security and building and engineering is one skill set. Looking for bad guys in logs screaming by at a billion lines per second is a different function. Is a different skill set. It's completely different in what it is and what kind of skills it requires. And so, um, I think there's just, I don't know. This could turn into like a 4-hour discussion additionally, but I think there's just so much to. I think there's so much to dive into, and we're going to run out of time. But I want to thanks for you guys for brainstorming with me. Maybe I get you back and we try to address some of these things, because I think my intent was to bring up things and try to offer solutions, but I feel like all we've done is kick the hornet's nest a little harder.
Yeah. We need the uncensored version where we go by code names.
And we turn off video.
Yeah. Or we can wear a mask,
Yeah, well, yeah, like we've been doing for months. That's an excellent point. All right, guys, thanks for jumping on with me and kind of talking about this. It's a stupid hard topic to solve, and I feel like it isn't sexy. There's not going to be a black hat talk about, hey, here's how we manage vulnerabilities, right? There's not, it's just not that sexy. But it's at the core of what IT security and cybersecurity is, and I don't know if there's enough attention. I don't agree that there's enough attention paid to this. We just need to do a better job, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts?
I think this once was a security issue. I don't think necessarily it's that anymore. I think this has become more of a business function. We partner a lot, and I honestly think it's the right move for sysadmins and people that are, maintaining their systems to maintain their systems.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a great way to go about it. It's just building that partnership and also doing some education, and really you gotta have the backing of the business to do it. And that requires a lot of time and a lot of understanding.
Sure. Definitely. I think we're just in a hole right now. I think we kind of just every organization's in a hole right now, and I think that we kind of really just got to put a little bit more effort into just closing those holes. Like you were stating earlier, it's more than just patch management. We got to look at it from a more wider range of point of view for us to really make these organizations a lot more secure. So
All right, guys. Brittany, Ace, thanks for joining me. Folks, thanks for listening. Another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast themed around vulnerability management and the train wreck that it still is. I think we'll make this a series, and we'll talk about it more. I think there's still plenty to discuss, both on the front end and setting up the initial conversations and the relationships, and on the back end, the hell do you do with things that you can't fix right away? So, thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao for now.
As we fade out on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole episode, we'd like to encourage you to chat with our hosts and guests using the Twitter hashtag #DtSR. Please check out the show notes, catch up on any episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. Our website is whiterabbit.net, WH1T3RABBIT.net. So on behalf of Rafal, James, for now it's goodbye. We'll see you soon on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.